This is All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. Three-pointers, dunk contests, and high-flying superstars. All these things are what make the NBA games exciting, but that was not always the case. In the 50s and 60s, the games were slow, boring, and overwhelmingly white. Then, a new competitor challenged the NBA's hold on professional basketball, one that was more athletic, a lot more physical, and with significantly more black players on the court, the American Basketball Association. The ABA only lasted 9 seasons, but it birthed a new generation of superstars like Dr. J and George the Iceman Gervin. The league also created a style of play that eventually influenced the mainstream culture of the NBA and its popularity. A new docuseries tells the complete story of the ABA from its founding in 1967 until its eventual merger with the NBA in '76. It's called Soul Power, the legend of the American Basketball Association. It's streaming on Prime Video. It was such an exciting documentary. My producer loved watching me watch it in my office. He laughed every time I went, "Swish, go!" when a piece of archival footage played or one of those great players appeared on screen. And I just had to share this with director Kenan Kamwana-Holly.
It's funny because we have a story that is what some would consider an older story, 1975, but the people we had working on it were purposefully young.
Oh.
We brought in 20-something editors to capture their energy and their curiosity. They got so into the topic that they had never heard of.
They have a good sense of humor, too, your editors, by the way.
Yes.
I want to say that. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. The ABA was founded in 1967. What were the circumstances that led to its founding?
Well, the circumstances were that there was a soft market for basketball. The NBA had not taken the foothold that we experience today. We know the NBA of Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird. This was way before that, when the NBA was a distant, tiny little cousin compared to baseball and football. And for that reason, the few guys got together who were hopefuls to be sports owners. And they thought, you know what, we could potentially challenge the NBA because they're not that strong and their product is not that good. And their whole intention was, you know what? Let's create a league that is a little bit better than their league and force them to merge with us. It should only take about a year or two. That's what they thought at the time when they started the league.
I want to focus on the year 1967 and 68 because the country was in such turmoil those years. How did the circumstances in the country in those early years affect the ABA in its infancy?
Well, one of the most interesting quotes I got that at the beginning when I was first being brought this project and I was considering whether to say yes to it or not was from the head coach, George Karl, who's known in basketball circles as the head coach of the Seattle Supersonics for the series that they played against Michael Jordan and the Bulls. But before that, he was an ABA player. And in talking about the project, he said, "Kenan, what you don't realize about this project is that the ABA was the first integrated workplace in America." And when he said that, Alice, it just blew me away. I was like, wait a minute, whoa. Give me some verification, coach. And he started to explain to me that in 1967, there were places that had integrated in title or in officially because they had one or two black people at different news outlets, different companies. But he said, we were 50-50 in our locker room.
Wow.
There was no, and that's not by design. He said they started recruiting the best player. They started taking the best player without any quotas that were previously employed by the NBA. And in doing so, it made our locker room full of guys who had never been around each other before. And it's hilarious to watch these guys talk about, to go back to being 20 years old and talk about how hard a time they had at the beginning, understanding each other's jokes, or even the way they spoke to each other. They said it was like going to a brand new world. And they talk about the process over those 7 years of the ABA's existence of gradually becoming friends and then gradually becoming family. They became brothers because of what they had to face in terms of the Goliath they were trying to take down in the NBA.
Before founding the ABA, there was this it was an informal race quota in the NBA, to be honest. Only a few black players were allowed on each team. What were the stereotypes that coaches held about black players?
Well, it's interesting. We hear them now and it feels like, what? They're so archaic. It's hard to hear them now. It's kind of mind blowing to hear the theory when you know of Steph Curry and LeBron James and all the Michael Jordans of the world, that you can't win with black players. Yes, they look spectacular. Yes, they have incredible ability, but you can't actually win with them. They're not winning players. They are players who play for themselves. They don't play for the greater good of the team. That was the stigma in 1967.
You see my editor, my engineer in our box going, "What? You're saying you can't have them be good players?"
It's funny because in exploring this story, we find ourselves face to face, and this is what sports does for us. It puts us face to face with our own American beliefs, prejudices, understandings, things that we assume to be true that aren't necessarily true. In sports, I love doing sports stories. One, because I was an athlete, a football player, played football in college at Duke. But because sports has a scoreboard, it's unlike anything else in our lives. Everything else is very undefined as far as who is succeeding, who's not succeeding. Well, if you walk into an accounting firm, it's very difficult to really say for sure who's succeeding and who's not succeeding. If you walk into a general business, a bakery, well, who's the best baker? Very subjective. But the NBA in basketball, ABA in basketball, it's not subjective at all. There's a scoreboard. And so when you say black players, you can't win with them. And then in the first and second year of the ABA, you have two black players lead their team to the championship. It starts to throw a monkey wrench in our prejudices.
This is a 4-series documentary, and you get into how it changed the culture.
Yeah, we do. That's such an astute observation. I appreciate that observation because when you see not just the way that the players are succeeding, but it's the manner in which they're carrying themselves on the court. Like a Dr. J with the way he wore his fro and full blown dynamic afro. He didn't have the biggest afro in the ABA, by the way. He was second biggest next to Darnell Hillman of the Indiana Pacers. But you see the players being able to express themselves in the way they play on the court and the way they dress off the court. That was the first time that was happening. If you look back in the 60s, and I started my career at NFL Films, if you watch those players get off the bus in the 60s, they're all saying gray suit, black tie, gray suit, black tie, gray suit, black tie. That was the case across all professional sports until the ABA came into existence. So the idea of what we see now with players strolling into the arena and you see them all got their different fits on, it's a competition to see who can be more uniquely provocative in their outfits. That all began with the pioneers of the ABA.
I love fit check when it happens. How did a player end up in the ABA versus the NBA when they were first starting?
That's an interesting question. I think at the beginning it was almost a fallback league for players like Roger Brown and Connie Hawkins, who've been banned from the NBA. These are players who were caught up in scandals that they didn't get very much due process, but because there's only one game in town, a monopoly on the business of professional basketball, these people who ran the leagues at the time could say, "Nah, you know what? We don't like it. Your name has been sullied. You're not coming in." So there were great players. It's funny because David just said James Jones, and he's interviewed in the documentary series. There's a number of great players like James Jones, Matt Calvin, who people don't know about, who are incredible players. And we were able to interview them. Thank God we were able to catch a number of them before a number of the folks who we interviewed and sat down with have passed away in the time since production, in the time since this is coming to light and being broadcast and premiered today. But the players in the ABA really arrived through, at first, they were people who had past that didn't allow them to get in, or they were a little undersized. But eventually the players wisened up. And you'll see the players started to realize that when I come out of college, I can negotiate now with these two teams against each other. And so it really changed the landscape of professional sports, and that the players entered with leverage for the first time ever.
I wanted to ask you, there's been a lot written about the ABA. What were you trying to correct with this documentary?
Well, first, you got to look at movies like Semi-Pro, right? Which is a hilarious movie of Will Ferrell and those guys, but it's the ABA and it makes them look a lot of times like they are more clownish, more less than second class basketball. And what we were able to show and what the players showed to me first, they demonstrated to me, like they told me things like we actually played against the NBA head to head in exhibition games. And I was blown away. And I was like, you guys play, I never heard that before. The ABA teams played NBA teams. Like, yes, but you got to understand that we won. And I'm like, wait a minute, let me look at the statistics. And their statistics are accurate. When the two teams started playing, the NBA had an advantage in the exhibition games. And by the last 3 years, the ABA won the majority of the games over the NBA. So you had teams like the Kentucky Colonels who are beating the New York Knicks. You had teams like the Indiana Pacers of the ABA who are beating the Lakers consistently. And so I think there's a validation that I hope the players of the ABA get to experience with this documentary series, in that they were much better, much more innovative than they've ever gotten credit for. And I hope that we're able to shine a light on the respect that they deserve.
This is All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. We're discussing the history of the ABA, the American Basketball Association. My guest is Director Keenan Kamwana-Holly. I want to ask about the three-pointer rule. The ABA was the first league to adopt it. It's arguably the most important shot in the NBA today. Why did the ABA add this rule?
Entertainment factor. They needed something to make them stand apart from the establishment. So the NBA, who they wanted to challenge, they had a very staid, slow way of playing, Allison, a very considerate way of playing. Think of it like there's a conductor and the head coach who would constantly be orchestrating and controlling the players. The ABA wanted the opposite. They wanted to play more. And if you think of Miles Davis playing along with John Coltrane, they wanted to let these players flow. And a great way of doing that is to create a three-point line. So it was exciting for the crowd, but it also opened up gameplay. As you see in the NBA today, it draws people away from the basket and allows smaller players to succeed, faster players to succeed. And so for the entertainment value, they decided, okay, we'll try something. We'll try this notion of a three-point line. And as we see today, it really, really worked.
I want to talk a little bit about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was Lew Alcindor at the time. Both the NBA wanted him and the ABA were desperate to sign him. How did the NBA end up with Kareem signing for the Milwaukee Bucks? This is a really interesting story.
Yeah, a very interesting story. And the answer is the ABA blew it. The ABA blew it. They had him. People don't realize this story in sports. Even people who are real basketball historians don't realize the ABA had Lew Alcindor, soon to become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They had him. He was ready to sign. He wanted to play with the ABA. The ABA had an advantage in that they were willing to allow him to play in New York, where, of course, he's from. And he loved that. He wanted to play in New York. He was not at all interested in playing in Milwaukee. He said, New York is my home. I want to play there. I'll sign with you guys, but I'm going to take one offer from the NBA and one offer from the ABA and one offer only. And so the ABA had a plan that we're bolder. What we have on our side, we're more bold than the NBA. We're going to put in this young man's hand a check on the day that we sit down to negotiate for $1 million, a cashier's check for $1 million in his hand. And that was their plot of how they were going to win Lew Alcindor. And I won't tell more. I'll leave it at that for you all to watch the series. But the way that check gets handled, oh my goodness, the handling of this one piece of paper changed the history of basketball and changed the history of the ABA forever.
What criteria was used to decide which ABA teams would be allowed to merge with the NBA?
That's a good question. Yeah. So the criteria we leaned into this. This is the final episode 4. You'll see this feature. My filmmaking partners and I, the producer, Todd Lieberman, who's an incredible scripted producer, and Brett Goldberg, an incredible producer I've known for 30 years. We actually made TV shows together in college. We really leaned into this question about how do we handle this final episode in the merger? The merger is so complex in that it's not really a merger. They're really kind of assuming the teams have to pay to get in. You would think it would be the other way around, where if you acquired all this talent, all this valuable IP, that you shower them with an offer and they decide. But the teams had to pay to get in. So that was the biggest criteria. That's a great question. Was who was financially soluble enough to be able to pay the fee to get into the league? And it turns out the only teams who were the New York Nets, the Indiana Pacers, the Denver Nuggets, and the San Antonio Spurs. And some of the teams who were great, who were lost, particularly the Kentucky Colonels, who have an incredible story, have incredible fan support, but did not have the support of their owner, John Y. Brown, who actually owned the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. He started Kentucky Fried Chicken. He did not want to pay the money. And so for that reason, his team didn't make it in. And it was a very sad day that's still felt by the people of Louisville that we recognize. We went to go film there. They still wish their Kentucky Colonels were part of the NBA today.
What happened to the players who didn't make it into the NBA after the 1976 merger?
Yeah, that's one of the toughest stories, Allison, is that a lot of the players, because the league started in 1967, the ones who have been with us from the beginning, including James Jones, who was mentioned earlier, Matt Calvin, they had really run their race by the time that the ABA ended. They were no longer the players they once were. You know how NBA or a professional basketball season can take a pounding on your body, and they were really done. And there was no consideration for these people. There was no consideration financially. There was no consideration as far as pensions, and they were kind of left out in the cold. And so a lot of the players, the majority of the players, did not make the transition over to the NBA. And many of them have had very difficult
Sure.
lives since they finished their basketball careers.
There's a whole series of young hoopers who don't know that much about the ABA. What do you hope they understand about it after watching your series?
Hope they understand that a lot of the things they love about basketball right now, from the style to the speed to shooting from deep, which allows, a lot of younger, smaller kids to participate in the game and be effective, that while you may not recognize it, young ones, like the forefathers of what you're enjoying on the game right now are people like Rick Barry, Spencer Haywood, George Gervin, Dr. J. Julius Ervin. They are the forefathers to what you're enjoying now. These men were able to revolutionize the game in using nothing but the power of their own individual expression and their willingness to link together and bond together in community. And that's really what took them over the top. And so I want them to realize that two things. One, that the forefathers of what you love about basketball were gentlemen from something called the American Basketball Association. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to realize and recognize what these men were able to accomplish. Most of them only 22, 23 years old. They took on great institutions, not only professional basketball, Goliath, the NBA, but also professional sports and the way that it was run as far as the way power dynamics were set up with players having very little autonomy. They changed that forever. And so I want them to realize how much can be accomplished when you have a willingness to lean into your individual expression and also willingness to do it in the form of community. I think that's something that the younger athletes, I notice a lot of them come to me for mentorship, athletes particularly who want to be filmmakers, who want to transition into that. And they say, we lack community. We lack a togetherness right now. And I think what you'll see from the players of the ABA was that community, that togetherness, that what they call their brotherhood is what changed the face of basketball and changed sports history forever.
That was my conversation with Kenan Kamwana-Holly, the director of the docuseries Soul Power, The Legend of the American Basketball Association. It's now streaming on Prime Video. We continue our conversations about institutions and artists who shaped American culture with the backstory of piano man Billy Joel. Susan Lacey directed the documentary film Billy Joel and So It Goes. That's next.